Okay. Before I call the meeting to order, I want to make sure everyone is reminded if you have anything to comment or discuss about that's on the agenda, we'd like you to come up to the center table so everyone can hear you. I'll call the meeting to order. Jen, will you take roll call?
Commissioner Wallner.
Here.
Commissioner Thel.
Here.
Commissioner Johnson.
Here.
Commissioner Corbin.
Here.
Mayor Denner.
Here. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second to adopt the agenda. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. We'll move down under appearances and acknowledgement. Number 1, we have Toby Morris, Senior Vice President of and Company LLC, Preliminary Debt Report, Water System Improvement Project. Did you have anything to say, Jen, before we bring Toby up?
Nope, we're going to hand it over to Toby.
Okay.
He's got handouts for you. He's going to take it away.
This is a printout then of what Jen has up there on the computer.
Thank you, sir.
So, Mayor, members of the Commission, as we get closer, there's been a tremendous amount of hard work put in by your staff here for the past year, from the weekly meetings to, I know, multiple visits from myself over here in the coordination just with USDA and everything above. What I wanted to do is provide more of a reference material, because essentially what you're having in front of you is about a $21 million project that's broken up between roads, water, sewer, drainage. And even though the one number comes together as 21 million, it's going to really amount to a couple different financings. And what I wanted to do today is go through some terminology, so if I say something, at least you can have a reference back. And by all means, if I go through something too fast, or if I skip over it or whatever, there's no dumb questions at all to this, because it does get in some areas it might get a little bit more complex, and the whole intent of this, like I said, is to provide a resource and probably ask you some questions regarding where you see yourself in a year from now and in 5 years from now. It's very exciting, I think, with what things are going on here in Madison from the True Shrimp, but it also requires some very careful planning, because once you issue debt, you really can't unring that bell. And so that's where we really try to take a very comprehensive yet global look to what affects whenever you may borrow $1 or whenever you may put an equity, $1 of equity into a project on that part. And so there's different kinds of debt that's out there. We're always, I think it's always beat into our head in terms of constitutional debt. What does that mean? It's related to the 5% of your assessed valuation. In the past, like when there's a TIF, even though you do not borrow that money directly, you are nothing more than a conduit, it goes against your constitutional debt. That's in the past where we've used the county as sort of the big brother, because their valuation is 10 times more than what yours are. So that's where I'm going to try to explain in terms of what is constitutional debt, what is not constitutional debt on that part. I'm going to take a look at your sales tax, your history of it, and some terminology that is used not only when you look at borrowing against your sales tax, but in terms of your ongoing, say, covenants that you may have with your sales tax on the debt. And then lastly, look at the utilities and look at what is the projected estimated costs, and what, more importantly, are going to be the sources and uses of those funds that will be coming in. Debt, for the most part, sales tax is debt. And I say in terms of constitutional debt. It's interesting, the state of South Dakota has a debt limit. It's $100,000. That's the most the state can actually go out and borrow. So they create these authorities where essentially, so like the Board of Regents, all the campus here, that is, the buildings are owned by the building authority or the health and education authority, and then they're leased back to the state. So that is one way that they're able to work around the constitutional debt side. If you study the history of our Constitution, it's interesting. The reason why we were so conservative when it was put in place is because when we became a statehood, the federal government piled us on with a bunch of debt, and so that was something the fathers of South Dakota wanted to make sure when they wrote the Constitution. Now, would they ever fathom that cities would own their own electrical, their own water, their sewer, in some cases hospitals? If you're my friends up at the People's Republic of Brookings, they own everything. So, I don't think they ever envisioned what cities could and could not do down the road. The most common way cities borrow right now is the use of their sales tax. It is very generally applicable to whatever you would see for borrowing. We've seen it in terms of swimming pools. We might see it in roads. We might see it in buildings, city shops, whatever that it may be. That is the one that's often pledged. When you get into a specific pledge, water or sewer, and we create a surcharge, because you guys have a surcharge right now on I believe on both, if it's a generally applicable upgrade, and it's then a surcharge to all the folks, that is not constitutional debt. The things you got to be careful on constitutional debt that we see the most is for any sales tax borrowing, and the more popular TIFs have become in terms of economic development. So those are things that we like to look for on that part. Like I said, I've got a lot of terminology in here. Like I said, it's meant to be more as a reference for you. When we get into some of the specific terms, and this is where we help cities do the planning and say, okay, one particular one that comes to mind is a coverage ratio, meaning for every dollar of revenue you have, what is your equivalent dollar of debt service? That has to be a positive number. Typically, we like to see a 1.5 times to 2 times coverage, meaning you have $2 of revenue to $1 of debt service. That can act as a planning tool for you to go down the road, and if you say, hey, we always want to maintain a 2 times coverage, we can then look at it and say, well, then you're only able to borrow X amount of dollars. And that's one way of backing in and helping your capital plan in terms of where you would allocate that sales tax dollars for. We look at, like I said, the surcharge. That's specifically for that project and that project only. So you can't surcharge your water, pull it out, and say, hey, we need some money for the parks department. So that is a segregated account on that part. These terminology is important because your interest rate that you receive on borrowing outside of USDA or outside of the SRF fund is directly related to the credit, the solid credit that you have. City of Madison is in an incredible spot because their underlying rating right now from Moody's is in the AA category. The highest is the AAA, and I'm on page 8 here, and the lowest is really just a single A. And if you get below that single A, you're sort of in no man's land, and it doesn't really represent very solid credit. When you borrow in the millions of dollars, we measure things in basis points. 1 basis point is 1/100th of a percent. So, like if we go out and get a mortgage now, we're probably used to saying that's a 4% or 4.15 or 4.25. When we borrow money, we measure it down into it's a 2.6532% because it's so precise. But every basis point change affects you, over the period of time in several thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. To get to the lowest interest rate is directly related to the rating that Moody's or Standard & Poor's would assign. To get to that higher credit rating from them goes back to what we look at in the terminology. Do we have a 2 times coverage on the sales tax? The credit agencies are trained to look at what can go wrong. They're not people that go outside their house and find what can go right. I mean, I call them the boogeyman committees. They look for things that can. I once was doing a rating with Sturgis, and the guy says, well, what happens if the rally goes away? I don't see how you're going to turn 600,000 bikers away because you decided not to have it. And he goes, well, that's a very good threat. And I says, I don't ever see it that way. But you can see those are the questions and how they envision things of what can go wrong. Excuse me. On page 9, Jen and I went into detail here to break down your sales tax overview. We looked at the historical numbers and what the growth are, and then projected out what that would be going forward. We put in what happens if you have a higher coverage at the 1.75, and just for an example, saying borrowing 5.5 million, how much of your debt service is dedicated, or how much of your revenue is dedicated to debt service? In this case, we're showing 32% because you only have one outstanding obligation on your sales tax. That was the Lewis and Clark water. I believe that'll be paid off in 2022, and that's about $140,000 a year. Very healthy in terms of what you have pledged on the borrowing side. Granted, you have a lot of other needs that you've taken care of with that sales tax, but from a pure debt perspective, we look at it and say, okay, if you were to borrow that, 32% of your revenue is going towards just that debt service. Typically, a healthy indicator is you don't want much over 40% unless there's extenuating circumstances, because the sales tax is so generally applied to whatever projects you have in town. If with Brad and I, was it back 8-9 years ago when the flood happened? That was the first thing that was pledged back to the state because it was the quickest, easiest, and most efficient financing. And so you want to leave that wiggle room at that part. I think, Fort Pierre at that time we were pledging 60-70% of sales tax, but that was the unforeseen circumstance that came out. In 2022, you're going to free up about $145,000 because the Lewis and Clark water bonds goes away. A lot of times what you see then is the city will backfill it right behind it and say, we're used to paying this on debt service. How do we model this part in? You can look at on page 10, and when we put in a situation and try to quantify what would happen if you maxed out your sales tax. If you said, hey, we were at the 1.75 coverage, we want to look at this for the next 20 years, I could say, all right, the most you can borrow based on the revenue stream, and we're maxing out, is going to be about $15 million. But now when you start talking constitutional debt, if you go to the next page, we don't have the ability to borrow 15. So there's sort of like a checks and balances. Every time you do something, the old physics, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. So just because you have the capability of paying back $15 million, we don't have the constitutional debt availability on that $15 million. What do you have outstanding? You have sales tax bond, TIF 1, TIF 2, the SRF that was pledged, and your general obligation. Even though go ahead.
The constitutional debt is similar to an authority to spend, in the sense that you meet those guidelines, so therefore you're authorized to spend up to a certain amount.
Essentially, it keeps you within the fence of it. Can you work around it? In the financing world, we can generally find workarounds, but it's expensive. We get paid to close deals, so it's just a matter of how do you work around it.
Well, ostensibly, you'll hear a state budget sometimes. They have so much money, they have authority to spend so much money. And they
Correct.
can be different figures.
Mhm.
Authority to spend, you can work towards authority to spend, which may be a greater amount than my experience with the state. But in effect, you have to find some mechanism to do that. And there's usually a cost with that, because cost usually is some other department or program is going to lose revenue.
True.
So you can be moved over. I mean, looking at it in terms of cost analysis, my experience is that the workarounds sometimes are not just dollar interest. They can be other things too. Things you might lose in a program, services you might lose in a municipal city. You might shut some things down in order to fund the project. I'm not saying we would do that. Please be mindful of that. But I was just wondering if that.
Well, you're right on, because when you take on debt, you have to pay that back, and it's not like you just found a new revenue stream. What's going to pay it back is probably a cut from another department where you have to allocate those funds until the growth of the sales tax catches up. And we looked at the sales tax this last year, it was very strong. You had a 7.5%.
7.64.
very strong, and I'll get back here, but we saw it very strong throughout the state. We saw double-digit growth in some of our major cities. You saw the state of South Dakota readjusting their budget, where the governor came out and said, no raises, nothing for education, and now all of a sudden we've gone to a surplus within the year end of the close of the numbers. And so those are things that, I recommend the city's budget that 2 to 3% increase in sales tax, and anything above is a bonus, because we've had those lean years. We don't know what the economy is going to happen. We don't know if Trump twitters again and, things get off kilter.
Our sales tax we've only had 2 years out of the last 10 that we haven't increased, and those those 2 years were less than $100,000. That's pretty good. I mean, that shows some serious growth in our town.
It does.
And economic development. I mean, just because that's what brings in sales tax. So just want to make sure to point that out to my mayor and fellow commissioners.
And it's interesting looking at yours, because you have the engine of the university with what they're doing on campus. You've had the hospital and how that acts as an epicenter for people to come here. The flood generates sales tax.
And and that's the cool thing about Madison, is that it's multiple areas. Whereas some of your even smaller cities, they have one thing that they can point to and say, that's why our sales tax is going up.
Mm-hmm.
We have multiple things, 2 or 3 that you just mentioned, and there's a number of them. So. And
you got a very strong manufacturing base, and we tax equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
We tax it very well.
Yeah.
So.
Falcon Plastic and some of the things there. I mean, there's a number of industries people don't even know about. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. So, anyway, sorry.
No, great questions, and and it reflects on your valuation. You've had some double digit in 2014. A lot of that, I think, you can look back and probably find some specifics, maybe on certain. But you're having your inflation, your reassessments, you're having the growth, Kelly Nielsen's new project coming in, and that then directly, as that increases, it frees up your constitutional debt.
Yeah.
But I want to point out is, here I'm showing what your existing debt is. Then if you bring on, say, the 5.3 of sales tax debt, it drops your availability down to 3.6 million. It's not bad. It's not great. But you can see then as that debt gets paid down and valuation goes up, your constitutional debt frees up. And there will be a point in time, I'm guessing, in probably the next 5 or 7 years, constitutional debt isn't going to be that big of a concern. You start to outgrow it on your valuation, and then it's a matter of what is your sales tax doing to keep up. We looked at the sales tax comparison as just to show you, I think, as you look what you're seeing, how your economy is going, because at the end of the day, we're looking at a $21 million project, and we have to go in eyes wide open to make sure we've analyzed it from several different ways. I've brought in some sales tax comparisons of what we're seeing around the state. Probably on the lower side of things was us and Pierre. We were negative 1 year, positive 1.3. Then this year we jumped to 11.75. Once again, I can point to some specific things related to that. Menards being one of them. That was huge. But you can see where you guys fit in the health overall of comparable cities on that part.
We also kind of looked at, before we got into the budget, about online sales tax too, and that was huge statewide. And so, that's another key factor that we all have to remember has just been instituted. So.
And frankly, that's fallen short from our initial projections. I know when we were out with the governor talking to Moody's and S&P with Lieutenant Michaels a couple years ago, we were thinking 40 to 50 million, and it was only 20.
Yeah, those initial numbers are maybe.
Exactly.
So, okay.
Where we're going with this all at the end here is we have the project overview that comes from the city engineer Chad and Brad with Banner. And these are the things that we see in place right now. Where if we take the water is $10.2 million. You've received a grant of $2 million from USDA with the loan of that $7.7 million. there's a requirement of 500,000 equity on that. So the water, to do borrowing for USDA, we'll have to have a separate surcharge for that. So that's going to be one of the financings. When you look at the sanitary, there's that 4.3 based on where the projections are at this time. Sanitary is something that, once again, you are collecting revenue on that will have a surcharge for the financing component. So right now we're sitting at two different distinct financings because me as a lender, I have to have a source of collateral. And that collateral is going to be a specific revenue stream, whether it's water, whether it's sewer, or whether it's sales tax. We know you don't have a storm drainage revenue on that, but we also know on the streets, which are typically picked up by sales tax, because it's toll roads haven't really been accepted in South Dakota yet. We're getting there. And so those are the four components that go into the overall of the $21 million that you'll be looking at in terms of how to get there. I put together just a hypothetical on the sources and the uses. On the next one, we know we have the USDA, we know we have the grant, we know there's a 500,000 requirement. Question then comes, is working a lot with staff, is how much is coming out of your equity, how much is going to be borrowed out of your sales tax. These aren't any proposed numbers, but rather it was just a placeholder to get my sources and the uses to balance out. And then what debt is associated with each enterprise. How much debt is going to be brought on the sanitary, how much debt is going to be brought on the sales tax, and how much debt is going to be brought on to the water part. And that really comes down to the next steps. As I said, the discussion tonight is really to bring it from a 30,000 foot to a 10,000, and I think over the next couple of weeks we'll bring it down to the 100-foot level of where we need to be and what is proposed. As we go through the constitutional debt, as we go through the sales tax, I'm going to ask you guys, I know you talked about the new city building. Where does that fit into this? We know True Shrimp, and I was just with True Shrimp this last week with the governor's office, and I'm excited. I think that is really going to start to grow some legs. Not that I was a non-believer, but I think with who they've hired, their equity, that project has some legs to it that should be coming together. Question's going to be, as with all businesses of that size, what is the ask going to be of you? Is it going to be a TIF? Is it going to be something? That's just my spidey sense that's saying that, because it's that large of a project where you'll be a partner to it. It's just a matter of where. We've looked at the sales tax. We've asked a tough question. Is it organic growth? Is it one-time growth? I think we can say it's been strong growth, historically strong growth. So it would be fair to say we can easily project 2 to 3% increase, as you have in the past and going forward, as we analyze what debt may come onto that sales tax. The tougher questions come. How much should be dedicated in reserves for each enterprise? Is it based on working day cash? Is it based on a percentage of your historical budget? Things like that, because the best debt's no debt, but we don't want to leave the city with zero cash available for the things that do come up. And those, I think, are going to be the tougher questions to come into. And as it comes bound, there's really going to be three financings. The water revenue bond, it's takeout. It'll be a short-term one that we'll have to issue by May to get an interim lender, because USDA won't allow you to open the bids until we have that interim lender. What my thought on that is, we'll do a short-term note, 3 years, draw down, save you on that interest, because they're just meant to be the interim on that part. I think we can work with local lenders on that. That'll be with a surcharge, so it's not going to count as constitutional debt. We're then going to look at the sewer bond. I know you've applied with USDA, but also with SRF. And that one, I think we can just put in the back a little bit for now until we see where hopefully grant money comes through. If it's SRF, they do the financing, so you'd still have to do resolutions, but you won't need to do any interim financing. If it's USDA, we'll have to do interim financing. I think the big decider on that's going to be probably what you're getting for grant money, if that's a fair statement. The last one then will be is in the sales tax. That's going to be the plug number. What amount do you want to pledge on your sales tax? how long do you want to finance the streets? Is it something that you only want to go 10 years? You can go maximum 20, but what's the useful life of that street? Because your financing should correlate to the useful life of that. You know, that's something. What I've been thinking is probably do an interim financing on that, because the 21 million is all based off projected costs. Bids are going to come in. This thing's going to ebb and flow. I think, you know, with your city building, with True Shrimp, my thought is to have the maximum amount of flexibility at this time until we can get through the next 2 or 3 years to see where things all shake out, and then do the long-term financing at that. Because there's going to be cash coming in from your existing enterprises. There's going to be, you know, this year there might be extra cash because you're at 7.5% and you budgeted 3%. Those are the questions that the council will have to ask. My job is to get you the lowest financing with the best flexibility in terms. And so over the next, I'd say, month, what we'll be bringing back to you for sure will be a resolution on the water, because we need to get that interim set up just so we can open the bids. We can do a resolution for the sales tax, and we can say an amount not to exceed $5.5 million. Does that mean you're borrowing $5.5? No, you have the ability to do it. So then we can publish it, you know, fully transparent with the public, and it's what I would see it as more of a line of credit that you're going to draw down. But at least now we can set the terms in place, and I'd like to do that by summer, because we're in an election year, and historically on election years, the market goes nuts about October through January, February. Now, 3 espressos later coming from Pierre, I went through that pretty quick, so I...
What are the chances of additional grants? And I guess I have a...
Hopeful.
Okay.
So, Toby, Rural Development broached us last week about potentially doing a joint application where SRF and RD work together. What are your thoughts on that?
As long as it's efficient, how do I say it? Each one has the ability to pull you through a keyhole, as Chad and Brad will tell you, just because they're government. One's easier to work with the other. I guess let the numbers do the talking is what I would say.
Thank you.
Good answer.
Chen, down the road we're looking at a new city hall, and I hate to do this to you, but I just thought of it. How much did we set aside, put in reserves out of the general fund this year for potential new building?
500.
500 total? Okay. It was a little bit into the police, there was a little bit into the city. We've got
Right.
several decisions we were going to pull all together.
Yeah, basically 250, 250.
Is that a sustainable number? Say we look in a few years, the bond for City Hall, I mean, could we pay for it out of general, not tap into second cent funds, or did we reach when we put that much into reserves?
I don't think so, because of the way that we're looking at restructuring some of our reserves too. We've got some work to do in the park department that we talked about, keeping those reserves down a little bit.
Thank you.
I think it's doable. It's doable. It's just, it's right, it's the shell game that we always talk about. Where do you want that?
Right.
And when you're looking, you know,
But in a sense, I guess, I'd like to keep as much of the 7% open for infrastructure as possible, and the more we obligate for debt, the less street and stormwater we can do in the future when we cash flow projects. But if we can pay for that potential new building that might happen without...
remembering though that we're still right now, at doing 600,000 transfers out to the beginning of every year. LAIC, Forward Madison, if we don't want to do that, which I understand, that's going to tax your general fund. Those dollars are going to have to come from the general fund.
No, I understand,
That's
right,
gonna tax your general fund.
right. I guess I wasn't suggesting
So-
that, but adding more to settling second cent down more with... If we could pay for that City Hall out of general fund, that would help a lot, I think.
That would be a huge...
And I know really at the end of the day, you kind of just add it all into one big pot anyway. I mean, second cent is general fund. We earmark it off to the side, I guess, from what we do when we're talking about it, I guess.
Yeah.
thank you for the information. This is a
Yes.
handy little
This is
report.
really
Yeah, very.
Thank you. You're welcome.
brings me up to speed.
Yeah. This is great.
Question
We'll
in the
agree to see
audience.
a lot of Toby in the next 6 weeks.
Absolutely. I'm on autopilot.
George, you want to come on up? Come on up. I don't think Toby will buy.
No,
Okay.
not today.
George
Okay.
Lee, I noticed you said this was a lot of hypothetical, is the way you're figuring it out. Well, could you give me a hypothetical surcharge you're gonna put on all these departments?
At this time, I would say until we know what the cash contribution is coming in from the city, until we know what the sales tax amount would be, any number I gave you, I wouldn't even be close to being right. And I don't say that facetiously. I say it because I'm very technical, and I want to make certain the numbers I do provide are within the direction the council gives me, from the equity contribution to the sales tax to what would be on eventually to the water sewer.
But I think before you'd ever go forward with that, you've gotta know that.
Yeah, and,
Oh, yeah.
and I think a lot of that comes down to, what other grants can we get? What are the rates? What are the loan rates? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to this. And
Many
I know
variables.
exactly what your question is, and it would be nice to say,
Well, I'm just saying, it was hypothetical. I would think you could throw out a hypothetical surcharge, is it gonna be $20 a month, $10 a month, $30 a month? That's,
you're.
Right now, I don't see us raising your bill anymore for this project, George. We're just going to reduce the amount of free cash we have for
what was the
capital
surcharges he was
expenditures.
talking about on the departments?
Well, you have a minimum you pay every month,
Yes.
and a portion of the minimum is a surcharge, and a portion of it's just set aside for capital improvements. We would increase surcharge, shrink free cash for capital improvements. Then in a few years, we have some debt paid off, and annually we adjust rates a little bit anyway. I don't see a giant rate increase coming as a result of this. This year, I don't see rates changing because of this.
And maybe to further that, from a technical standpoint, the way I say surcharges, I have to provide collateral. And so let's say your bill is $30 a month. And to Commissioner Corbin's point, they may drop the 30 to 20, then I backfill it with the 10 of the surcharge, so you still know it's 30 to you. But from a lender, they need to know they have a dedicated revenue stream that they can go to, and so it becomes a matter of a security, a collateral position. And so that's why you will see surcharge coming out, but to Commissioner Corbin's point, it's going to be what is the amount you're paying overall. It's just going to be categorized. Do you take more from your right pocket or your left pocket?
We're joking.
Yep.
So I don't see us adding a surcharge on top of the current bill. It's just, we're going to reshuffle the current bill a little bit.
Does that make sense, George? Answer your question, or?
Yeah, if you think it does. I don't see it that way, but.
How do you see it, George?
That's too long of a discussion. I don't think this is the time and place.
Anything else, Mayor, members? Super. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so
for your
much.
time.
Good info.
Yes, it is.
We'll move on to item 2, acknowledge purchase of Panaview baseball, softball scoreboard, Bachman Park.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So we budgeted in 2019 for 2020 to replace the scoreboards from Blockman Park. Number one thing is the scoreboards at Flynn Field are shot, they're wore out, there's no parts for them. So what we're going to do is youth softball has to have timers and all this stuff. I should start out with the scoreboards are 14 years old. Life expectancy on a Daktronics scoreboard that we currently have is 10 years. So they've lasted 4 years longer than what they are. So I have we budgeted $14,000 for scoreboards this year. I have a bid here for $4,820 per scoreboard. And we're going to, if we buy 3 of them, they'll give us a 15% discount, so it'll be under $14,000 total. And then we're going to take the current scoreboards that are at Bachman and take them to Flynn to replace the scoreboards that are at Flynn. The 2 on the softball diamonds down there. So, and then we'll have enough parts to make it 10 more years with them, because we'll have 5 spare scoreboards in the future for down there to be able to get parts from them.
You got room to store them and all?
Yep.
How old are the ones at Flynn?
How long has Paul Olson been dead? Because that's when they built them. Larry Lee and Paulie Olson. That's who paid for them. So 25, 30 years, 25.
So those scoreboards will be out,
They'll be out. They still got the old screw-in light bulbs.
so we'll
and,
surplus it. Get rid of.
Yep.
So we will have something eventually to surplus, even if it's for disposal. There's
Yep.
no parts, there's
Yep.
no, so we'll,
Scrap.
you and I didn't get a chance to chat today, I didn't catch it. Any of these options down here? Are you adding any of these options, or is it just this 4820 times 3 minus 15%?
So we're going to take the scoreboard panels off the existing ones and use them on these. And then the bottom one is we're going to do ourselves with vinyl and stuff, so we're not going to have any of them options. That's
So
what
none
they're.
of these options below none of the
And
3.
and if we do decide to go with any options, I do have one business owner that has approached me. He said he would be willing to help us with the scoreboards. He said not $15,000 worth of scoreboards, but he would be willing to help with part of the scoreboard cost of the
So
scoreboard.
potential donation.
Yes. So it's an 8-week leeway time. Baseball starts May 1st and softball. So in return, we have to order them. That's why I'm here.
We provided for this in the budget.
I'll make a motion, we acknowledge purchase of Panaview baseball, softball scoreboards for Bachman Park.
Second.
Further discussion, comments?
Mike, you said you're going to take the 2 out to Walkman?
Yes, so I'll replace, what my plan is to take, and we'll do all the work internally between the electric department and the park department, and we'll take diamonds 1, 4, and 5, replace them with the new ones, and take them to diamonds 1 and 2 at Thuy, the adult softball fields.
Just want to be clear.
And then we'll have 1 spare for parts, and then in the future, hopefully we can replace diamonds 2 and 3 with commissioner's approval in following years.
Good, thank you.
I think what he's saying is we got 4 good years out of ones that we shouldn't have had. He's calling that a home run.
Don Hansen from Daktronics said he couldn't believe that they were still working. That
See, he thought it
the
was a
LED.
home run too.
So
Well, good work
Yeah,
keeping
that
them
is
going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
one thing we do is we turn the fans out, or we make sure that they turn the power off on them in the concession stand every night, and that's one thing that burns them out. Is when the power's constantly on, the fans in them running.
Sure.
So then it burns the LED screens out of them. So when they installed them, the electricians, they wired them correctly so that the concession stand person at the end of the night shuts them off. So
So does any of these scoreboards out at Bachman have advertisement around them?
correct, yes.
They will stay there?
That is the business owner that has approached me to be willing to make a donation.
Further comments, discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. And Gary.
Number 3, do I have a motion and a second to acknowledge application for temporary alcohol license and set date of hearing of March 2nd at 5:30 or soon after for the Madison Fire Department?
So moved.
Second.
Any further comments or discussion on this?
You have the application in front of you. We will publish the notice of hearing this Thursday. I chatted with Randy this afternoon, and then we will work this week yet on the special event alcohol coverage that we get every year for this. Paid for by the volunteer, paid for by the city, reimbursed by the volunteer fire department. Randy will be here 2 weeks from tonight for the hearing.
Any further comments, discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Have a motion and a second for acknowledging application for retail on and off sale malt beverage license and set a date of hearing of March 2nd at 5:30 or sooner, or as soon after, for Dakota Cinema LLC, Dakota Cinema.
So moved. Second.
Jen, did you have any comments on this
Once
one?
again, the application is in front of you, along with the notice. This would be a retail on-off sale malt beverage and a South Dakota farm wine out at the movie theater, now run by the Brown family. Kelly will be here also 2 weeks from tonight to answer any questions you have. I did have a nice conversation with Chief Meyer earlier this afternoon. He initially claimed that he had no concerns. We'll see if there's any public feedback or anybody shows up to the public hearing, but tonight we'll ask you to set that hearing. We'll also publish this on Thursday.
Further comments, discussion? Not hearing or seeing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Consent calendar.
Motion to approve the consent calendar.
Second?
Motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Any further comments, discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion carried. Seeing nothing under unfinished business, we'll move down into new business. Do I have a motion to authorize the mayor to sign agreement, Lake Erie Improvement Corp., 3-year development for lot, and that should be Lot B?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Lot B of Lot 4, Lakeview Industrial Park, 18th edition.
I'll make a motion to authorize as, you want to call that an amendment, or we just,
I would call it an agreement.
okay?
No, the
Well, the
lot
Lot
B,
B versus
the lot
this.
Oh.
change of lot B.
The-
Do we have to amend it first, or can we, I think
Your
we can
motion
just
would
roll
be
with it.
Lot B. Yep,
Okay, motion for Lot B.
thank you.
Second.
Okay. Chad, this one's yours. Before I get started, is this agreement the new one or still the old one? Jen, do you know?
This is the old one that hit the packet because it
Okay.
came out on Friday. We have the new one here for you to sign after the
Okay.
meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Chad?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor, and members of the commission and public. Included in the agenda packet is a said agreement. I did want to also point out a typo in the agreement, as was discussed a moment ago. In the final whereas statement in the agreement, it references Lot C. That should be Lot B. So what this is it's related to the construction of the water tower and the rural development project that is being planned in this vicinity. And the agreement actually does a relatively good job in laying out some of the details in the whereas statements, but the city currently owns Lot C of a plat that was approved by the commission back in October of 19, where the tower will go. There's some challenges accessing the site through the already dedicated easement from 12th Street related to potential wetlands in the vicinity. And Lot B is immediately north and adjacent to Lot C. Lot B is where a potential substation may be in the future for the True Shrimp project should and when that comes into fruition. So we approached Lake Area Improvement Corporation to see if they would be willing to transfer this substation lot to us a bit earlier than perhaps they had wanted to, so we could have fee title to it. We could use it to access the site for the water tower, use it for access, but then also for staging area and so on. And so they consented to do that. However, Lake Area Improvement Corporation back in 2007 had placed some covenants on their industrial park, which talks about when property is transferred over to potential developers. In this case, the city would be a developer. If development doesn't happen within 12 months, then that property is supposed to go back to LAIC. Well, the substation certainly will be greater than 12 months, and so there's this agreement amends that to a 3-year period, from a 12-month period to a 3-year period, and then that will allow us to use the site for access, use the site for staging. Potentially, it may be fully contained on the tower site, but it gives us some additional options. And then permanently, when True Shrimp comes, it will likely be a spot where there would be a substation. There's no cost for the parcel. There may be some closing or platting costs, minor ones that may come forth. I would say those would likely be under $2,000 if we even realize those. So we aren't paying for the property per se, just like we did not pay for the water tower parcel. Yeah, that in essence is it. Did I miss anything in hitting some of the points there related to this?
You did good.
After this agreement, you notice some blanks in the agreement. Once we sign this and send it over to LAIC, then they'll actually execute the deed that actually transfers it, take it to the courthouse, get it recorded, and then they'll be able to populate the book and page numbers that are currently blank in this document. But this one is a prerequisite, so to speak, for that. And I'd be happy to stand by to try to answer any questions.
Concerns, discussion, comments? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carried. Number 2, authorize the mayor to sign letter of contract, Banner Association, Inc., GIS, technical assistant / maintenance. Do I have a motion and a second on this?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Chad, this one's yours?
Yes, I can talk about it, thank you. I included in the agenda packet is a two-page letter agreement and then some supporting documents, 2 pages of that for this. This is for GIS support in the amount of up to $2,000. It also, within this document itself, it sort of explains some of the background, and I will touch on it as well. In coordination with Mr. Lawrence and their departments, the plan is to move the information that's currently in our current ESRI GIS Online system into the system called Empower that the electric department primarily at this point in time uses. It's a similar type GIS online system, and so Empower was a system that has been used for a couple years. Our original GIS information that was started in the 2005 range or so was used ESRI, and so we've been working in that, and now it doesn't make sense, at least for the utility department, to manage 2 different softwares. And so this is going to the administration with the interface with the online portal is not, it's somewhat complex, I guess I'll just say it that way. And so I would like to be able to just be able to do this internally, and we likely will be able to do a fair amount of this internally, but I'd like to be able to do it, but we're not there yet, so we need a little bit of assistance in transmitting that information over to the utility department. Ms. Minert in Brad's office is taking care of that. I do anticipate that it could be much, much lower than the $2,000. For example, in this year's, we had a contract like this last year. I think it was up to $8,400. I think they spent $5,300, so it was quite a bit lower, and that was with a full-blown support before the determination was made that we would make the switch, make the migration, so to speak. And so that's what this is, and I'd be happy to try to stand by for questions.
Normally comes from the water fund.
Yes, I should have said that. It comes entirely from the water fund, because the portion on GIS Online right now is just our water system. We have sanitary sewer also in GIS layers. That's not on the online portion. The primary work here is extracting, if you will, or obtaining this information from the GIS Online portal. And it'll be fully mobile access for Mr. Lawrence and all his staff on the Empower system by or before the end of the year.
You said this goes back to 2005?
That's when we started the GIS, yeah. My predecessor had just started it by collecting not the parcel layer, it would call it a flat layer.
Yep.
But that was the predecessor, and then over the years we've imported all the infrastructure systems into GIS.
That's awesome, that's what we got it for, and so.
And as we transition to other software, I'd say our data is in a fairly universal format,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
if we ever go back to Esri or something else comes out we don't know about, we'll be able to migrate relatively easily, frankly.
Yes, we'll still use the Esri in my office right now, just not in the online format. So we'll maintain both for a bit of time. We'll see what the future brings as to what's going to make the most sense, most economical for the city.
Gives you a few more features, not being in the online part for you guys.
It
A little
does.
deeper and a little more detailed, but keep your eye on it.
One of the main
I know you are.
One of the main advantages of the Empower is that we don't have to pay per user for
Yep.
field access, which adds up over time with Esri, and it slowly bogs you down. And with Empower, we can cut all those costs. So,
Any further comments, discussion? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Number 3, do I have a motion to review and award bid number 886, renovation of the water building?
Is this the one that came in over bid? Over,
We gotta have a motion.
I'll make a motion to review and reject all bids for number 886 renovation of water building.
I'll second that.
Brad, did you have anything?
no, the project came in substantially higher. The contractors, when we moved it to partial summer work, the contractors are all fairly busy with the uptick in the economy and looking forward to a big year this year apparently. And all of them, when we asked them why the prices were so high, so that's just what it's going to cost this year. And so we asked if there was anything that was wrong with the project, with the way it was designed, and they said nope. It's going to be an expensive year to build. So that's kind of the long and short of it. I think if we could have done it over the winter on a building that's already enclosed, we might have been able to get a little bit better prices. We still would have been over budget. We kind of anticipated that, but we didn't think we were going to be this far over budget. So the recommendation is to reject all bids.
Any further discussion, comment? Not hearing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Do I have a motion to set bid date?
March 5th.
March 5th.
I'll make a motion to set bid date March 5th for bid number 891, Water Main Improvement Project 2021, Division Avenue Water Main Street Service.
Second.
Chad?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Included in the agenda packet is the advertisement for bids, one page. Also, I had provided you copies of the bidding documents. You have those. I should say the drawings. This isn't the full set of the bidding documents. The project manual will also be supplemented with that in case you wanted to review that. But it's Division Avenue from 1st Street north to 4th Street south. Installation of an 8-inch water main there, and to replace the existing main, replacement of street surfacing from 1st Street, 1st Street down to Center Street, the asphalt surfacing, and then there will just be a gravel replacement surfacing within the same right-of-way, existing right-of-way. South of that, south of Center Street, it's narrower than normal and definitely not what we have for our typical streets. And then there was a bore underneath the railroad a couple weeks ago. Maybe it was last week. You had a boring agreement with the BNSF that you considered. So everything seems to be in order. We have the plans in order. We look to start advertising officially in the newspaper record on Thursday, and then again open bids on March 5th. This project was budgeted, and I have no reason at this point in time to believe it'll be over budget.
Split between highways and streets, about $509,000?
Yes.
Just between highways and streets?
Right now, I would estimate the same split for the, between that and the water fund.
What, you mean water and streets instead of highways?
Water and streets, right?
Yeah. I figured that's what you meant.
Yeah. Not being critical, I was just making sure.
Oh, yeah.
So what did you say we had budgeted for?
509.
Thank you.
Yep.
Have any further discussion, comment?
Any of those landowners interested in being annexed with this project?
We had one landowner meeting, and wasn't related to that. It was related though, and that some of those topics came up, and my response right now would probably generally no. Several of the folks on the south side of the tracks, as you may all know, the east side of the tract is outside city limits. This runs right down, city limits boundary runs along this project, basically. The folks on the east side are still served by city water, but they're not city limits.
Any of them ask about their street getting paved?
No.
Understood, thank you.
I should, again, I apologize for I mentioned this over the course when we were developing this project, but just for the benefit of the folks here, this project did jump up onto the priority list. As you know, we go through and evaluating infrastructure needs, and as we prepare the IIP, infrastructure improvement plans, on an annual basis. And this one wasn't even on the radar. And then a couple of years ago, the water department had 2-3 breaks, and a significant loss of water, and this pipe was showing its age rather abruptly, and so it jumped up. As you have all heard me talk about, we try to be very responsive to, as priorities change, as brought to our attention by the departments, and this one kind of jumped up there.
Other comments, concerns? Not seeing any. All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, motion carried. We do have one public comment, and before we start that, I want to make sure everybody understands that public comment means public comment. We do appreciate you bring in your concerns to the commissioners, but we need to follow those guidelines very closely, 3-minute limit, and there will be no discussion or action taken based on your comments from the commissioner at this time, but your comments may be a basis for future agenda items and action. Again, we appreciate you coming to the meeting and expressing your comments. We have George Lee, Apartments on Egan.
I'll admit this is kind of after the fact. I haven't been down to Egan for I don't know how long, but the other day I left the community center, drove down there, and those apartments they're building, how come they weren't set back to be in line with the other homes along there? And how did they get that close to the neighbor's house? Isn't there footages and ordinances you can only build so close? And
I can answer.
I'm only looking to you because you and I talked
Yeah,
about that.
I can. I
It's
just didn't know.
closest to the
Yeah.
house.
The setbacks meet the minimum for that particular district. It's a 25-foot setback from the front yard property line and a 5-foot from the sideline. The houses that are along there, most particularly the ones to the south, are just well exceed that. And so it really draws your attention. You can see that. So they meet all the zoning guidelines.
I understand that, but why just for looks wouldn't you set them back so they were in line with the others? Just
But I think one of the factors, George, was the community members who met with us about it. They wanted to make sure that they didn't lose any off-street parking. And so it was as far forward as they could be to ensure that there would be parking in the back for the apartments.
I thought that when you were talking about it, there was no parking in the back because it was in the floodway. The first time they were talking
No,
about it.
they had a smaller area window to place the structure and then the parking to try to stay out of the floodplain and the floodway. And they stayed as within the zoning district limitations and pushed it as far as they could. So indeed they could put the parking in the back. That is in the 100-year floodplain, the parking
Yeah.
is, but it's just out of the floodway. And so they had to fit it. That's the only way they could fit it in there, basically.
But I certainly think that really decreases the value of the homes that are south of there. The looks that. I mean, I honestly, I don't know I don't know who lives in the house right south. Is that Draper?
Yes.
I don't know who'd buy that house now with that thing there. I mean, I don't think any one of you guys would want this built next to your house like that.
They did.
I mean, it's kind of after the fact. It's done and it's there, you know, but I just,
The only thing is, we don't have any basis or authority to tell them to push it back farther. If an applicant comes in and what they propose is in compliance with the code, we have no basis to deny it. And so we understand it's obviously closer, and it does not appear to fit well in the area. And yeah.
but I think you probably have more power in that area than you think. When they come, you could have used some discretion there. I mean, you're the ones running the city, not the contractor. I mean, I know there's setback policies, but you guys are the last buck. But it's over and done with. It's the first time I've been down to Egan since I even started this thing. So
I don't think there's any, what could we have done? I mean,
I-
other than
we had
do something to get
We had a
sued.
significant amount of discussion, and even the Historical Society, they were required to chime in about it. And they reviewed that project pretty thoroughly, including the setbacks, and they came back with a recommendation to allow them to proceed as proposed. In other words, we had to talk quite a bit with our attorney as well, as what can we do and what can't we do,
But when again, the Historical Society is an elected member of the city. You guys are. And you don't necessarily have to agree with what they tell you.
Right.
You know, they're just a board.
Thank you, George.
Thank you.
Any announcements? Seeing no exec session, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I didn't get a second.
I brought them for you.
Thank you. I've seen this.
Did we vote on it?
No, it's still.
Do you want that back?
Yeah.
Say, Ken,
Nope, I can get it from
are you, gonna grind that vote up and do it?
I need a second to join, okay.
Run off a copy.
All in favor, signify by aye.
I work
All
for a printing
opposed?
company, so we can,
Motion
we
carried.
can make a copy and I'll get the original back to you.
I was thinking we skipped the vote on that.
But,
We didn't have a